The final recording for eukaryotes has to deal with helminths. Now, helminths is the fancy way to say worm, and worms, of course, are in the animal kingdom. So we are talking about a eukaryote that is an animal. And the helminths are going to fall into three categories. So what you would familiarly call a tapeworm, the technical term for that group is cestode. The liver flukes, which you've probably never heard of, are the trematodes. And then the roundworms are the nematodes. There it is, right? So maybe you dissected one of those if you took, say, Gen Bio 2. So again, big variety in this group, but they're all multicellular animals. What we're going to see in the helminths, all three of these groups, is that they are going to derive their nutrients and reproduce within a host. They all do sexual reproduction, and they need to do this within their host. They may have more than one host. The definitive host is where they actually do most of their life, their adulthood and their mating. And then they also have sometimes what's called an intermediate host, which would be something like another animal, sometimes a snail, things like that. They can also have what's called a transport host, which just kind of carries them around, but they don't actually use it as part of their life cycle. To complete their life cycle, what we're going to see is all of these worms need to actually leave their definitive host in order to complete the life cycle. Typically that happens as a fertilized egg. That tends to mean there's high mortality, right? So if you are passing out of, say, the digestive tract of this little girl, and so you're in feces, there's pretty high mortality among those eggs. And so what we'll find is that these organisms, like check out, yeah, this guy will work. They tend to focus very heavily on reproduction. So like half of this fluke is testes, right? Or if you look at a tapeworm, if you look at each and every one of these little segments, it's just chock full of eggs. So they put a ton of energy into reproduction. And so what that means is they can actually produce hundreds of thousands of eggs, and that of course can be problematic. So a few examples here of different helminths that may infect humans. And some other organisms as well. You might notice on this graph that we actually share quite a few worms with things like pigs. Like they put swine down here and pigs up there, same thing. And so we can transmit these back and forth. This is a classic example of the helminths that infect humans. So a pinworm, this is a roundworm, this is a nematode. And basically, this little girl has picked up some, pinworm eggs, something like that. She manages to get them into her mouth. They go into their intestines, which is where they would actually latch on and start basically sucking blood from the intestinal wall to get their nutrients. They're going to be producing hundreds of thousands of eggs, which are going to pass out through the feces. Kind of itches when they leave. She scratches their butt. Right? She can pass those back to herself, get them on toys, and pass them to the next host. So, fun, right? Helminths are wild, and they do actually cause some really crazy diseases. Again, they have really complicated life cycles. This is I don't know if I want to say that. Yeah. This causes schistomiasis. What was the one I was going to tell you about? Hookworm. Hookworm is another nematode that actually infects something like 20% of the world's population. And so you run into these situations where, so hookworm actually drills through the skin at the bottom of the foot. So someone walking around barefoot might pick up a larva that drills through their foot, ends up in their bloodstream. It circulates till it finds its way to their lungs, where it hatches out and they cough it up. and they swallow it. And that's actually how it's going to make its way to the intestines. In the intestines, then, again, this is going to kind of latch on. By taking that blood, it's an amazing source of protein, nutrients that those worms need. And so, again, it's going to put a huge amount of effort then into reproduction. So the thing that happens with any of these worms that are acting as a parasite, by stealing nutrients from that host, in this case a human host, you can run into things like anemia, malnutrition, and typically, again, this is going to be spread in areas maybe with poor sanitation, places where maybe people are already malnourished, and so this can be really problematic. And so hookworm, for example, 20% of the world's population is infected with that particular worm. Anyway, crazy stuff. Would love to talk more about it, but we get this really brief window to talk about eukaryotes.